Hello, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me. This is our first exploration of a happy hour, an Ibsen happy hour. Quintessence currently presenting a Shout into the Void virtual play recitation festival. We selected a series of classic works from around the world and across time, which we felt resonated with our current moment here in the United States. And we were so lucky to put together an extraordinary cast to read Ibsen's Rosmersholm on Monday night. So if you haven't had a chance, you can still watch that through tomorrow evening. Please visit our website at qtgrep.org for access to that reading. And this is an opportunity for us just to talk about this playwright and this work. Many people know the works of Ibsen, even if they don't know or haven't actually seen the plays. His characters, specifically his heroines, have transformed the dramatic imagination and literature. Hedda Gabler, Nora from the Doll's House. Even this play, Rosmersholm, which is not as well known in our country, the character of Rebecca West, the heroine, was so potent in its own time that a number of people have used her as a call to arms, and a famous British feminist even used Rebecca West as her nom de plume for generations. So we are here with Michael Zlabinger and Paul Oakley Stovall for a moment just to check in. I have some questions that people sent us via email and over Facebook. And I also got to talk with Emily Trask, who read the role of Rebecca West earlier. So we're going to share that video. So if you're with us on our Blue Jeans system, you can use the question and answer section and add another question if you have one. Or if you're on Facebook, jump in there, ask a question, and we'll try and field those as well. So gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Had either of you met this particular play before we read it this week?
I had not. Brand new to me. It was a really fun discovery.
Yeah, same. First thing I did was reach out to Michael Halberstam at Writers Theater and say, help. I don't know this play, and he lives up the street from me, so.
Well, if there's a good expert, he's certainly a good one to connect with.
And actually, I'll say, he said a funny thing. He said, well, you went to acting school. You have your Bachelor of Fine Arts, right? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, you should get your money back, because how do you not know this play? So from his point of view, he thought, it may not be Hedda Gabler or the one we first think of, but he thought it's one that we should all know about.
Yeah. Yeah, I was also surprised that I hadn't come across it, because I think it's just as strong as his best known works. And I also read online that it's considered to really rival his great ones, and that it should be as well as much produced as any other.
Yes, and I mean among sort of the scholars. Many put this up there with Wild Duck as his two greatest plays, and it's interesting that those are the two plays that here in the United States we sort of avoid. It's also just fascinating to me that he wrote this sort of in the latter half of his career. He wrote over such an expansive period of time, and his genre and style evolved in many different ways. I mean, to think that this play was written by the same guy who wrote Peer Gynt, or Emperor Galilean, or Hedda Gabler, even in that context, is fascinating to me. And what I love so much about it is you really feel him making that shift back into kind of symbolism as a style, and the play sort of comes to life on so many different levels, making it just sort of both incredible critique of society as well as this haunting piece of theater.
Yeah, speaking of the symbolism, I was disappointed to read that his original title was supposed to be White Horses, and I just think that's such a more evocative title, which my dog agrees about. Wow. But yeah, White Horses would have been a beautiful title. Rosmersholm, I don't know. It would have been my preference, but I think because he had it published in Danish, and I think the Danish publishers wanted that title instead.
Well, just for fun, I'm going to push back because I kind of agree with you, Michael. But just for fun, I'm going to push back and say White Horses sounds like an album.
Nah, like a Tori Amos song.
Well, and it's funny when I was looking at the title, I thought of things like Skyfall or Winterfell, the names of these places where so much happens. So
Yeah,
that's why I thought, okay, ultimately that's probably why he settled on it.
yeah,
Rosmersholm is not just the name of the estate; it's what's between Johannes Rosmer's ears, his home.
right. Yeah,
And White Horses would have made you think, okay, so is the play about ghosts and is the play about that? Well, I guess in a way it is though. But all right, like I said, I think I kind of agree with you, but I can
yeah,
see that
right,
it's a more sturdy title to say Rosmersholm.
right. Yeah, and ancestry and legacy
Yeah,
and pressure to live up to what either your family or your society expects of you. That definitely the title works. But once the imagery of white horses came up, and the, the poetic quality of the language around that was just so clear, that how haunted they are by uh, this these ghosts that won't go away, and the kind of pressure that they put on themselves, of the expectations of from society, and whether it be in the workplace or at home or the position in society. That was the biggest meditation for me, or the thing that I picked up on the most working on this play with you guys, was that it's a real struggle to the kind of the pressure that you put on yourself when you feel societal pressures. Because although a lot was about the expectations of how you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to act, or how you're supposed to contribute to society, the inner struggle of each character was I think came out of a place of the pressure they were putting on themselves to be a certain way, or if they were fighting against it, the longing that came to break out of that.
Right.
it's just so well built. You know,
Mm-hmm.
what Michael's talking about applies to every character. One thing I'll add is if you're fighting to hold on to the way Kroll wanted his children and wife to not go some other way, you're trying to settle into the ground your way. So there's that struggle too of like, I'm not even. He thought he knew what he wanted, but what he was afraid of is that his offspring were not going to, that he'd be forgotten because they'd go some other way, and we're all afraid of being forgotten.
Mm.
And I think the other well builtness of the piece is, Dr. Kroll, Pastor Rosmer, faith, science.
Yeah.
He just he just built it on these archetypes of the human condition and said, here's the argument, this is it,
Yeah.
and I'm going to give you fascinating characters to work around it, but this is the argument, this is the thing we all go through. Do I follow my intuition, or do I look at the facts and do what I assume would be correct based on what I'm seeing in front of me, or do I go with this feeling I have of this, but the feeling's invisible.
Yeah.
So do I just trust it? And then Rosmer kind of falls in between. I mean, it's so well done because Rosmer talks about how he's lost his faith, but he's operating on faith. He's operating on the faith that there is no, that's a leap of faith right there.
Yeah.
He's actually becoming more of a person of faith than most priests are.
Mm.
Because he's really leaping into the void of like, look, I just believe what I believe, and I'm going to trust that it's already in me to be a good person. I don't need all of that stuff. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also interesting to me, just in terms of the moment we're in, that third wheel of the story, the press and the power of the press, and this idea of the truth, and each of the three gentlemen or really the five major characters, all have a different sense of what the truth is or what the facts are. And because of their position and their history, they all are arguing for different truths and different facts. And to see that in this play sort of constructed so perfectly so that the only result is either people changing their opinion or sort of a kind of entropy or chaos of thought is really fascinating as we try and sort of parse or pull apart our own reality now. Because to me, there is no way, because of how it's built, for Rosmer or for Rebecca to go backwards. They have sort of stepped across the threshold into their revelation, and so that is an amazingly fascinating kind of dramatic reality to create.
Well, especially Rebecca, she has built a persona that she has to stick with, or her whole thing crumbles. And that's why Kroll is such a threat to her. She's built a whole thing. And, the only facts you know about her is the facts she decides to tell you is the facts. It's her facts. She's the best press. She's her own best press person. She's her own Kelly Conway,
Yeah.
And Haley McEnany, she's got her facts. But if somebody comes in and busts her facts in the, because they know the truth, that won't do.
Yeah.
That won't do.
I think it was also well constructed because Ibsen includes two different newspapers, to have the Standard and the Morning Sun, and to have two such different camps and representatives of those papers was really brought that part of the plot alive.
And look at the names of the papers too.
Yeah.
The Standard.
Yeah.
And the Morning Sun, which you have faith is going to come every morning. You believe it's going to happen. The Morning Sun gives you life, and it's the Father of this. It's the Father of this Morning Sun, God. Yeah, he's a smart man.
Most certainly.
That Ibsen.
It's also interesting, like with a lot of his progressive characters, we have Erlich Brendel, who is potentially kind of a fortune teller or a visionary, and the play allows us to sort of accept him and take him on in all of his complexity as a flawed character, and then ultimately does choose to humiliate him. And it's fascinating. Ibsen would write Hedda Gabler a couple of years later, where we watch a similar kind of flawed visionary crash and burn because of the scope of their vision. And those characters to me are just such Ibsen tropes, but such powerful characters of the danger of when you do sort of push outside the boundaries of the standard or of the expectations of society. And the chances for greatness are there, but also the chances for utter humiliation
and destruction. Mm-hmm. You will be crushed. We will crush you.
Yeah.
Your truth is not something we want. Too much truth, we can't have that. We will crush you.
Right.
We will erase you and put you in the gutter. Yeah.
I do think the play also does, and Michael, this was sort of a thought I had about when I was hearing you read the role. I mean, Rosmer is the last of a family, and this idea of these families that have sort of held these positions and built nations, and then the end of those families and the end of those sort of that ruling class, I think is resonating pretty loudly right now. And it was interesting the amount of pressure that the world of the play put on Rosmer to kind of step into that responsibility. And he really seemed desperate to sort of avoid taking the reins of that that role or of that expectation. And it made me think of so many leaders or people that are born into privilege or power right now who are getting caught in similar situations where they don't seem interested or apt to the moment, but have inherited that position.
Yeah, but there's this other dimension that comes into play with this story is that he has a real conscience, and so even though he has been born into this incredible life of privilege and has this incredible reputation and respect, his conscience causes this inner battle and really pushes him not to rest in his laurels or to follow in the footsteps of his ancestors, but instead really tune in with the times. And I don't think he discovers until he takes action what a cost it's going to be. That there will be so much pushback because there's so much idealism that comes out of his vision that he kind of sets himself up to get that resistance from Kroll, Mortensgaard, and Rebecca. But I definitely thought of that, how this story, even though it's 130 years old, is definitely reflecting some of the stuff that we're going through today in politics.
Do you think he could have taken that action if it weren't for Rebecca? I mean, Kroll seems to suggest that by nature he doesn't have that essence or that ability or that desire. I find that part of the play really fascinating too, that she really has this kind of power to transform him and ignite him.
Yeah, and he does say very clearly that he came to these decisions in collaboration with her, and that they that was the real core of their friendship, was the dialogue that they were having about politics and what their role should be. I don't think he was really aware until much later in the play that he was maybe being manipulated or controlled. But that's a really good question. I don't know if Rebecca hadn't entered his life, what would that have been like to have lost his wife, be a widower, and not have the presence of Rebecca in that house where his life would have taken him. Rebecca's definitely a very strong force.
Or would his wife have even taken her life if it weren't for Rebecca?
Right.
Yeah. Doesn't mean they wouldn't have separated or something, doesn't. Right, but I mean, would she have been dead? Like, it's interesting.
Well, she was haunted by the fact that she couldn't bear them children.
Right.
So that was a real torment.
That was a real thing.
And
a part of the play that is translated a little differently in other adaptations really clarifies that Rosmer sort of loses physical interest with her.
Right.
Yeah.
And that keeps coming up as a kind of comment that he sort of pulled away from her once there wasn't the possibility of having kids with her, which further drove her into a kind of despair and madness. So it is interesting to me too, just what that says about Rosmer as a man, and what sort of Rebecca really does literally reignite in him and taking him to another sort of part of his life. Because I also wonder if he would have left the church entirely if she hadn't provided that perspective for him.
Yeah.
So that they
Yeah,
could have just been like many old couples that sort of live in isolation of each other, but sort of, take different wings of the manor house.
Right, right. Doesn't mean he would have been happy, but he might have just coasted on out.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating relationship because they were very very clearly not uh, physically tempted enough to be unfaithful to his wife Beate, but it still didn't stop them from having this very rich, very intimate platonic relationship, and that makes him vulnerable. And you will be whether that kind of relationship, a platonic relationship that's that intimate, you're going to be changed by it, whether the other party is manipulative or not.
Right.
And it may be that they went to those very intimate places because that's the only kind of intimacy that they felt was appropriate, or that they had, that they could do.
Yeah, because the walls have ears, so they might have really wanted
Right.
to be getting it, but the servants are everywhere, Helseth is everywhere. You
Yeah.
know, they're trying to figure this out because I think they definitely wanted each other.
Yeah.
But
I'm
Rosmer is so clearly proud of the fact that he was faithful.
right.
And if he had those thoughts, he probably, being a good priest, repressed them.
Push them down.
Yeah, pushed them down. Because that comes as such a shock to him when he hears about the rumors and the suggestions. And
Well, in fact, fascinatingly too, he has literally his ancestors watching down on him with his every move, sort of in a very O'Neillian way. These portraits are watching his every breath from the time he was a child. And I love that idea when they say that the Rosmers, as children, never cry, and as adults, never laugh, and that's part of the tradition of the family. That kind of locked up masculinity,
yeah,
which I'm sure comes from the oppression of this pressure of being this kind of force for a nation, not just for oneself.
Mm.
Um, and I do.
he also
Croy,
grieved. He was very grieved over the fact that he had no childhood. He felt like he was a middle-aged man when he was a kid, and that's a really powerful. He's really grieving about that he didn't have a real childhood.
Yep. It's just that's another facet of the play that's very well written. We all know what that's like on some level. Rosmer's was an extreme, but man, he clocked that too, where we all look back and go, what was my childhood? Was my childhood as good as, Alexander's or Michael's, or what was their child? I don't, I'm, re- we all come to a point in our adulthood where we say, was I happy? What? Did I miss something? Is something missing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really wrestled with the final act, the short act, where they make the decision to go kill themselves, and it must be rooted in what the larger theme in the play about legacy and reputation is about, because I think they both felt very helpless and very exposed, and they make that pact together. Emily suggested that there was something strangely erotic about that brainstorming and committing to this terrible act of taking their lives. What did you guys make of the ending? Because it's Ibsen is asking a lot of the actors to go to that place suddenly because you're not expecting it. It's a real surprise. At least it was for me.
I feel like when you see it on stage, the human connection happening between the two people, it is different. the dance of death that is the final two acts is much more present. And so, like with most of Ibsen's plays, I do feel like as an audience member, you become aware of the focus coming in closer and closer, and the opportunities for escape becoming less and less. And I think when Rebecca, part of, to me, the magic of Rebecca West is that, as I think she's quite ignorant or innocent of a lot of her crimes, in the sense that her intention is driving her so, her mission is driving her so specifically that she sort of loses her humanity or perspective in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And we watch her have these revelations that completely remove her foundation as a human being. And so I think she is truly lost in terms of how to survive what's going to come, and knows that she must vacate the space, but she, as he says, has nowhere to go. And then when he challenges her to that final act, I think she does see it in a oddly Judeo-Christian way of her punishment for what she did, intentionally or not, to his first wife. And then the magical part, in my sort of understanding of it, is the fact that he realizes it simultaneously, that the only way he can find any kind of balance in the world is by joining her.
Yeah.
And then there really is a kind of bizarrely sublime balance in that choice to exit the building together. And it's interesting, people always ask about the white horse, this idea of the omen that it represents. But it really seems that whenever Rosmer has left or passed on, this horse has sort of shown up as a premonition of that departure. So it is interesting to me too that the play is almost suggesting like the universe is opening that door, and that it's the right time for the house of Rosmer to fall. That there's no place for him in the world, in a way.
Yeah, and there was a line of Rosmer's that really stuck out to me too, when he says, "Since I've lost my faith and I have no God, or we have no God, we must pass the sentence on ourselves. We need to be our own judge."
Gents, I have to jump off.
Okay.
But I wanted to say two things. One, Alexander kind of put it the way I would have put it to answer that question. And I would just add that he was just really leaning into symbology for me of the white horse, and that he brought it full circle. So I did struggle with it as a modern day person of like, you're going to go jump into, you two are going to go do that. And then I thought about like, back then, Rebecca's 31 years old with no children. Rosmer has done something that he can't live without shame. Like, what are their options? And back then, I wonder if people and their relationship with the other world. And so I was struggling with it too, though, but I was trying to wrap my head around what it would really be like to be back then and to wrestle with those issues. But the other thing I wanted to say is, I promised myself I would say this before I jumped off, the language. We did go from one translation to a different one. And before I even got the first one, I had started reading what I think was probably nearly an original adaptation. The language was so dense. And I got about 40 pages in when I got the email and got the other one. And I just want to say that when we talk about this old play or that old play, 100 and some years, when you look at what's happening in the world today, this is not an old play.
Yeah.
And the words were coming out of, I can speak for myself as a black man in America who wouldn't often get the chance to even be thought of for a play like this. Those words were just coming right out of my mouth with my very natural patois. I didn't have to I didn't feel the need to, elevate or speak a certain way with the word. The words just came out of my mouth. And after it was over, I thought to myself, that's because the play is still a modern play. 100 and some years, that's nothing. What he's talking about, it takes humans so long to change. Of course, we're still wrestling with this crap because it just was only 150 years ago. It takes us so long. So that's a beautiful thing and a difficult thing to wrestle with. But for me, I walked away thinking I'm going to look at all types of plays that I have been afraid of for years in a different way.
Mm.
And I'm going to dig into them in a different way and not feel like they're so separated from my life and my existence, not only as a person in 2020, looking at something from the 1800s, but also as a Black man looking at a play that was written about a society of people and people of a different race that I wouldn't have had that role, but you know those things are my things. Those problems are my problems too.
Mm.
And there's no need to change any words, and you could just be yourself and be in that situation. And I think that's what separates the Ibsens from the wannabe Ibsens. He wrote and I don't know who those people are, and I respect them too. But I'm just saying, I'm probably one of them. But yeah, I think it's a modern play, and I think that as artists, we should look at some of these plays in that way more. Maybe there's no need to people want to, let's move this play to 1930s, Germany or whatever. Like, you could just do the play. It's pretty, you know, what's happening is still happening, so
Well, thank you, Paul.
thank you
So
so much.
wonderful to have you.
Take
Great
care.
seeing you, Paul.
You
Great
too.
stuff.
So, Michael, since it's just the two of us for a little bit,
Yeah.
I can show Emily's my conversation with Emily, which was
Yeah.
really interesting. But just to follow up, I think the other part that's hard to get in a reading of a play like this
Yeah.
is just the sequence around the morning newspapers that he gets
Yeah.
when he sees himself slandered in the press. I think that was, I mean, we still have this today with the power of the press becoming incredibly sort of diluted in all these different formats of social media. That's more complicated. But this idea of something being able to destroy somebody's reputation with one editorial, I think in the context of this play was an extraordinary force. And his response, Rosmer's response, is just to head back out with the elders and try and regain some kind of dignity. And they humiliate him. They say, you have no place in a leadership role.
Yeah.
So he's done, and I find that really fascinating too. We don't really have a chance to unpack that with him because they go right into that final act.
Yeah. Now,
But
he's certainly deflated when he comes back and realizes that, and that's a very human experience, to have a very unvarnished, passionate vision for how you want to be or what you want for others, and then to have reality come crashing in. And that was part of the story that really resonated. And also fuels that final act.
Yeah. And I am a hopeless romantic, so I always fall on that side. But I don't think this play is worth anything if they are not madly in love with each other.
Absolutely. No, and the fact that they haven't been together, and the only real physical thing they do together is to harm themselves at the end is devastating. But before they make that pact, the fact that they are so supportive of one another, they have clearly influenced one another intensely, and it kind of been a society of two after Beate's death, and he's been working through his grief, and she's been there for him. Absolutely, I think the love between them is very intense, and it's one of those plays where, depending on who you cast in those two roles, you would get very different dynamics. You could have multiple versions with very different types of relationships, very different types of chemistry and fire. And I also like that because they are very philosophical and political in their conversation, but because it's fueled by this passion for one another, it creates this wonderful blend of how personal it is. They're not just talking about these things to pass the time. It's the vision that they have, and there's also something to the fact that the two of them are very side by side in their vision, and just to have one person bear witness and support and recognize your opinion or your view, that's a powerful thing. And there is something there that if things had played out differently, or if society had been structured differently, they'd be a beautiful couple. I definitely felt that too.
Yeah. And if Michael, I'm going to switch to this Emily conversation.
I'm excited to see what Emily has to say.
Yeah, might be interesting too to hear some of your responses from the other side of the other side of the performance. All right, here we go. Hello, Emily Trask.
Hello, Alex Burns. It's nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. I'm here in Philadelphia. Where are you again?
Central coast of California, right in a city called Santa Maria, near in northern Santa Barbara County, kind of near Pismo, on an actually very rare cloudy day. So I feel like that's a good omen for this conference.
Perfect environment in which to discuss Henrik Ibsen. Exactly. Well, so we're gathering. You were part of our reading of Rosmersholm this Monday, and since the reading, we've gotten a number of questions about the police and the character that you played, Rebecca West. And so we're gathering just for an informal chat, talk about who is Rebecca West. Emily and I sort of talked before this about how hard it is to talk about this character because so much of the play and its action is based on revelations about Rebecca's character. So we're going to try and have this conversation in a way that if you have yet to watch the reading or have yet to see this play, we will not give everything away. But if you are one of those people that do not like spoilers, this might not be the best conversation for you. But so Ibsen is writing in the 19th century, the middle of the 19th century, primarily, and through that entire century. And he is putting these women on stage that are quite extraordinary. And I think it's hard to, and from a 2020 perspective, to really appreciate how revolutionary these characters were and what it would have been like to have been sitting in Norway in the theater in the 1880s, seeing these women really sort of take over the world of the plays and step outside of the box that was expected of them to take control of situations, to redefine their own personal worlds and relationships, and then also take on the world at large. And my preface to this is I have always felt at heart like an Ibsen heroine, which is very strange.
I love it.
The men to me are fascinating, but it's always been the heroines where I've really connected into his work. And it was so great, Emily, having you in a very brief time really sort of start the investigation of Rebecca West.
Oh my God.
What was that journey like for you?
Oh, I was going to say, oh my goodness, I don't. Those folks who watch the reading and have questions about Rebecca West, I'm with you. I'm with you. the scratching of the surface of this play and this character. We just had really 3 days to spend on the play, and I obviously did a little bit of prep work ahead of time, but it's left me with more questions than answers. I think that Rebecca is a rare opportunity to really grapple with and wrestle with an incredibly complex character. So the journey was at first reading, rereading the play and being like, yeah, this is an awesome role, and I can't wait to sink my teeth into it. And then getting in there and sort of feeling like I'm kind of in a dark room, like where's the furniture and where's the, I'm bumping into end tables, and it was really finally with Hassan's guidance and in the reading that I finally felt like I was like my eyes were starting to adjust just slightly to the room, the dark room of who she is and the world, and just in time then to be done with the project. So I feel like I started to see the connectivity in some ways but I mean, I would be lying if I didn't say that, like a 6-week rehearsal process on this would seem too short. You know what I mean? So, but I feel really grateful that I got to at least, scratch at the surface of it.
She is in some way, as a character, like a consummate outsider, right? Like she's not even from the small town that the play takes place in. She's from
Denmark.
Yeah.
Denmark, north. She's from even further north.
An even darker, more remote location. And her entire journey has been one where she's been a foster child brought in without full awareness of her heritage and her background, and all she knows is that her mother was, for all intents and purposes, a serving woman in a respected family. But so she's entering a world where the class structure is so containing or limiting to the society. And unlike a lot of people in her world, she's received this extraordinary education because of her foster father, who has pretty much opened his library and wealth of knowledge to her, and then sort of unleashed this woman on the world.
And Dr. West, her foster father's library isn't just any library; it's a subversive library. So for anyone to be reading that material at that time was, like I said, subversive, but for a young woman to be reading it and to be sort of loaded with that insight. I mean, I think about the fact that, Nietzsche was doing some of his best work around this time, and how that would influence anyone, let alone a young woman with a mind and a fire, but of a lower class in a real patriarchal society. So yeah, I think she's a loaded gun. I think there's a line that always struck me in the play about being back at home with the midnight sun, and thinking about how much of time is sort of relative, and in a way that I'm feeling acutely right now in this current circumstance. But yeah, that is to say, I think that she comes from a different world, and the world, the Rosmersholm, the world that she enters is, aside from Mrs. Helseth, is a male world, is a masculine world, and the only other female is present but no longer in the picture. So I think it's also the structure in the house kind of mirrors the societal structure outside the house as well.
And she's really brought into this estate, this very prestigious family's home, on the pretense that she is going to be nursing or taking care of a friend, a woman who is struggling with her own health and specifically her mental health. And that's also really fascinating to me that, like her mother, she's being brought in as a kind of caretaker or companion, despite her erudition and sort of her upbringing and where she's coming from.
Yeah, I think that's one of the ways inside of it to me and inside of her to me is the parallels of what we know about her life before she came to Rosmersholm and what she's living at Rosmersholm. Like you said, that the parallels of her mother's work and, supporting, being the major support system to a very intelligent man. And, again, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but I think that those parallels, how our own personal histories are doomed to repeat themselves, I think is kind of at the crux of why Rebecca can't move forward in some ways that you think that she might, or what she's bumping up against is that repetition.
Right.
Did that make any sense?
Yeah. We're talking around things because we're trying to be respectful of our audience that has yet to experience the glory of this play. So, Michael.
Yeah.
So it was funny because when we were meeting earlier, we spent all this time debating how much of the finale to talk about.
And then I just went for it. So what do you guys think of the ending? Oops.
Yeah, we just jumped off the cliff, which was fine. I mean, there are so many layers to this play that I feel like, and like with any great Ibsen play, you sort of have if you don't know where the play is going to go, then you don't know Ibsen. So,
right. Well, it was kind of one of the main things I wanted to talk about because the ending, having only worked on it for 3 days, is still kind of chewing at me because what does the ending mean, but also just that sheer uphill climb and that cliff that Emily and I had to jump off of with that final act. Because in a way that you could end the play, since we're already blown the cover off all the spoilers, you could end the play at the end of Act 3, couldn't you? Of her leaving. But then again, Ibsen already has a famous play of a woman leaving and slamming a doors. Maybe. Did The Doll's House come before or after Rosmersholm?
Doll's House was first. Hedda came afterwards.
Okay. But the Act 4 is because it already feels like it's going into Act 4 comes out it came out of nowhere for me when I first read it and while I was working on it, and with further investigation. And as you said, when you get on your feet, or if you experienced it live as an audience member and saw actors doing it on their feet, there would be a visceral, physical thing that would happen throughout the play that would set the stage for that final act.
The other thing on the symbolism level that I think is, to me it's very Chekhovian in that the mill, right, is the force of the family's power.
Yeah.
I mean, it's how they've accumulated wealth and is the industry through which this entire community is existing for power and for the sort of economic reality of the community. So it is also fascinating that it is in this system through that they choose to find their end when they are in fact spiritually trying to liberate the workers and the oppressed people of this community. In the recent production in London, as only they can do in London, they had this amazing special effect where the idea that the mill was literally being stopped by the bodies in the water and then causing the whole system to kind of overflow.
Wow.
And flood the land. It was absolutely horrifying and extraordinary, as if the entire community was going to drown in the failure of this couple. So yes, I did want to take this pause because we did go a little further with Emily, but I just thought it was too funny.
I know.
Because we just went for everything. Yeah. So let's just for fun, spoiler alert, let's just go off the rails a little bit and reveal a little bit of the full majesty of Rebecca West. So if you don't want to know that, this is a time to sign off. But so to me, what makes Rebecca particularly fascinating is that she has an alternative agenda to the one that we perceive for the first 2 acts of the play. And we learn that her reason for becoming involved with this family and for gaining access to this family was part of a sort of an active plan or agenda as a revolutionary, as a radical thinker, to try and convince this family, or specifically the sole survivor of this great Norwegian family, to rethink his relationship to religion and to politics, and become a force for the progressive movement. It's interesting to me how much we see her over the course of the play learn a lot about both where she's been successful, but also where she hasn't been successful, and where her intentions are truly good and honorable, and where she has failed in that mission. And I find that part of the play and that part of her character so thrilling in the context of our current moment, where we are looking at systems, oppressive systems, and trying to find out ways of questioning them, dismantling them, and looking at the many different approaches people are taking. And Rebecca West, in a funny way to me, is one of the original activists. And she does, in my mind, achieve a kind of hero status despite her duplicity in certain ways, because of the fact that she sacrifices her own life and well-being to really try and take down the supremacy of this family and the societal structure in which she has, in which she lives or is part of. So to me, that is one of the most awesome parts about Rebecca West. And the fact that she was so powerful in the sort of imagination of many writers at the turn of the 20th century, that a famous British writer and feminist and activist took Rebecca West as her pen name, to me just sort of shows exactly sort of how heroic that character can or is when sort of seen in its own time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think, Freud included Rebecca West in one of his essays for other reasons, but I do think that, but I think yes, if like I said at the beginning, if you have questions or if this character has hooked you into wanting to know more or dig deeper into yourself or what are her motives I think you're in very, very good company. I think that's sort of one of the enduring powers that she has, that this character has, like you said, as a revolutionary. I think to me, there are a couple different adaptations, obviously, of this, translations and adaptations of this play, and some of them sort of heighten the fact that, Rebecca's really a feminist in a world where that's not a word yet. Fighting for, she doesn't have the right to vote. There are lines in the play about why would a woman want to know about politics. And so I think that if the world were in different circumstances and different structures, she might have moved through her life and her quest differently. But because the world is what it is, sort of her only option is to steer from behind the scenes, and and use what tools she has to redirect the powerful men in her life. And so that's a very fascinating thing as the actor to get to the end of the play and then figure out what you need to load up with so that the beginning of the play actually kind of makes sense and moves in that way. But there's a lot of layering that has to happen in order for some of these very complex transitions and to even jump from one to another as the actor who's playing it.
Yes, because it seems like to a contemporary feminist, some of the choices Rebecca West makes in terms of taking on the roles of the submissive woman or the serving woman to achieve her kind of long game would be looked down upon or criticized as sort of a failing. And it's interesting that the sort of crux of the drama is Rebecca West's heart and where it lives and what is it committed to and that journey. I was really fascinated in the reading how powerfully I felt that moment where she is given the opportunity to sort of commit to romantic love. And it starts off with her joy initially, and then it deconstructs itself into this kind of horror and negative response. From the outside, that is an extraordinary moment. Did you, in sort of going through it, did you have any impulses as to where she was?
I think that that's one that I would like 6 weeks of rehearsal just on that scene. And it was nice. Michael and Hassan and I actually stayed after one rehearsal just on our own time and worked through it a few different ways because it's I guess I'll say the actor's problem and the character's problem are the same in that moment. In that, like, there's a lot of conflicting impulses and conflicting emotions. And, as Emily playing the scene, I felt really frustrated and like I kind of couldn't get where I feel. And then I was like, oh, that's probably exactly what Rebecca is feeling in this moment, that kind of blockage or so having to give into the fact that that this is a multi-truth universe and a multi-truth character in a way is kind of terrifying as an actor. A lot of what we train in these days is the Stanislavski approach, in that you have a goal in mind and an objective, and sort of everything you do are tree branches from that. And we know that humans don't necessarily work that way, but it certainly is a way through a script, or the spine, to find the spine of that character and what drives that character. And this is playwrights don't write with that in mind. Certainly, they don't write. And I think that Rebecca she defies that simple through line of a singularity. So that is to say, it was an amazing challenge, and I want to try it again.
Yeah. I think when I think of, Ibsen had so many different periods or styles that he explored over his quite long writing career. And this is one of those pieces towards the end of his major works before he went into sort of full symbolism. But you sort of get a sense of that bridge. Literally the bridge being crossed sort of with this play. But what I do love more than anything are in his plays the way the oxygen in the room just starts to run out, and the way the light just starts going away, and suddenly the world, which is full of opportunity and hope, narrows itself. So there's literally kind of only one choice that can be made, or one result that can happen. And that's this kind of theater that's quite horrific and not very American. But as an audience member, I love that experience.
And to sort of spin off on that too, I love that there is something so haunted about Ibsen's work. I would use the term haunted and almost like otherworldly. Like that there are, and Rebecca says there are ghosts and there are ghosts. And I think that there are a lot of ghosts in this play, and obviously the representation of the white horse, which I think was maybe the original title, or was going to be the original title of this play, White Horse or White Horses.
Yeah.
But that the spirit world feels closer, like the membrane between the world in Ibsen and the spirit world just feels a little bit closer. And the white horses, to me, represent, the coming of destruction, or, the predecessor of doom, or the Grim Reaper. And there's also, the biblical reference of the coming of the apocalypse, the four horsemen. The first horse that arrives is the white horse. And so I feel like those threads throughout the play also give it that sense of impending, like you're saying, like the oxygen is getting just a little less and a little less. I'm with you on that. I love it. And I love it, and it also keeps me up at night.
Yes, very, very much so. And I just, I can't quite imagine this play feeling as resonant as it does at other times. Really, just in terms of this situation that Ibsen has created, where the nation is barreling forward and demanding a new kind of order and a new kind of justice and a new system. And we're in the literal house of the aristocracy, of the patriarchy, of the ancestors, that is on the verge of collapsing. And the sort of crossroads that he creates for these individuals, while they're also part of this sort of larger conflict, to me, haunted by their ancestors in the past, and also desperately hoping that the way the world is spinning is towards a kind of a new order or progress, is so thrilling. Ibsen just somehow manages to do that. I mean, to me, in a way where you're one step away from the kind of the whole, like, greater truth and order existing, but like we're not going to get there today.
We might end up in the mill race instead.
Yeah. Or falling off of the tower, or
mm-hmm.
Or getting off the train. Yeah.
I think for me, and I think I maybe even put this in a comment at the talk back after the reading, but to me, one of the things that was that echoed so loudly is the use and the manipulation of the press in this play. And I was like, oh, this is like, just reading the exact same sort of conversation with self that I feel like was happening in the play. And so, like you said, I think it's so prescient and so apropos to the moment that we're living in, as we sort of also are in our homes feeling the oxygen tighten a little bit right now.
Yeah. Just as a final thought, Rebecca West obviously wouldn't have had the access that she has if she were not a woman. But I do think it's interesting, just from the outside, people that are critical of her character for what they perceive to be kind of manipulation or deceit. It's fascinating to me how that would be perceived if she were a revolutionary of a different gender, in terms of her goals, in terms of what she ultimately achieves. And that also is just a part that I find is interesting, just in terms of when a woman is accused of being manipulative as opposed to strategic. When a brilliant woman is in control of a debate, or when she's manipulating a debate. It's just fascinating that this play, to me, sort of puts that in the center of its debate. And so she literally is like hiding in the closet.
Yes, behind the arras. Yeah, I mean, I think that's another thing that feels so so timely in terms of that discussion when it comes to politics, or women in attempting leadership roles, and things like that. I will say that as an actor, I become like fiercely defensive of the characters I play, and I would say I am fiercely defensive of Rebecca, in that even though I only got to really live with her for maybe a week, I would go to bat for her, because she is brilliant, driven, passionate, and her avenues are incredibly few. The opportunities for her to create change, and there's a big theme of action in the play. And as a woman at that time, like, you are not allowed action. Even by your physical clothing, you're not allowed action. You need men's help to get in and out of carriages because of the restraints that society physically puts on you. I think of it, and this image kind of came to mind when working on the character of, a parking lot that has been covered over with pavement or blacktop, and how there are some weeds, some bits of grass, some weeds that still beneath the blacktop find that little crack that they can grow through. And I feel like that's what Rebecca has done, because she's determined to grow in some way and grow that action. But I can see from outside of it, you might have some questions about how and why she does what she does.
Yeah. We've sort of left the final card of her reality not spoken of, which I think is interesting. But I feel like if you go into that area of conversation, you do sort of unravel the entire house of cards for this play. So we'll leave that for one of our post-show conversations when we get to do this play together someday.
Yes, please. And thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about it, Alex, because it is just like, it bears further conversation, and it's sort of, it kind of haunts you, as an actor who's had the opportunity to scratch the surface, but not fully scratch the itch. So thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you as always for engaging with us at Quintessence. It's such a privilege to have you in all the different capacities that you take on. So,
my great pleasure.
And look forward to seeing you in person once we get through this.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks.
Wow. Are you unmuted, Alex?
So yes, that was the one and only Emily Trask talking about her experience. Michael, any thoughts from listening to that little bit?
Absolutely. I was in total agreement with her and you when the two of you were talking about this experience of an Ibsen play, and this one in particular, where the drama is so intense that the the oxygen, use the image of the oxygen being sucked out of the room. The depths that the characters go to by the end are completely destroyed, and it really throws the balance of the community that they're in off because of it. Is strangely cathartic when you really bring it to life. On first read, it's like, it's heavy, it's dark, it's gloomy, it's bleak, but the things that the characters are fighting for are so human, so relatable, and our positions that they're put in are so clear. So it's easy to go down that path with them. And I also can relate to Emily talking about how when you play a character, you become very protective of that character, or you become very clear on what that character's position is. And I felt that way about Rosmer as well. And that's what happens with any well-written character. You become invested in it. You become very clear about what they're fighting for, what they're up against, and so they kind of become part of you. But I also liked your thoughts on Ibsen as a whole. That notion that he gives you a taste of what things could be, but maybe not today. That's maybe a very intentional, because to leave that taste in the audience's mouth, to walk away with that, then it's not a happy ending, but it also gives you a vision or a sense of hope of what things could be, or what might be, or where we might go. And I also am aware, whenever I watch good drama, that it's an experience to dive into that world and walk away from it, and first of all know, okay, that was an intense experience, but I survived it. I didn't die in the mill race like they did. But also, no matter how severe a drama may be, if it's a very well written human experience, which this one certainly is, you also walk away from it a little relieved. Like, okay, good. I'm not the only one that has gone through hell and back, or has had serious doubts about my place in the world, or unrequited love, or losing the respect of a close friend, or losing someone close to you to suicide. To have that reflected back to you, know that you're not the only one. That's where the healing nature of theater always gets.
Yeah.
Every time.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming back to ruminate.
Absolutely. Anytime.
It's been such a nice little escape today, just to think about this amazing play in spite of all the chaos in our world. And if you haven't watched Rosmersholm, you have one more day to do it. And you also can check out the incredible interviews that have been created with Ibsen scholar Tanya Thresher, and with the director of our reading, Hassan Al-Rawas. Both of those are available on our webpage and are just such a wonderful treat to listen to really profound conversations about Ibsen and theater in the world over the last 200 years. So thank you so much for watching this. And please also come back for next week's Shout Into the Void Festival and Alice Childress's really spectacular and also timely play, The Wedding Band. Thank you again, Michael. Thank you to Paul and to Emily who joined us. And we'll see you all at the theater soon.